El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. El seminario comenzará en breve. Por favor, permanezca en línea. La emisión está comenzando. Todos los asistentes están en modo de solo escucha.
Hello, I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of 360. Take time to join us for our next webinar today, the travel trends, technology, and the ROI of T&E. Entertainment expense spending is an important growth strategy for companies of every size. While these investments can lead to new business and new opportunity, maximizing every dollar spent also requires a disciplined approach to the often complex T&E expense reporting and reimbursement process. Today you will discover how companies like yours are reducing overhead processing costs and streamlining workflow to quickly deliver a full return on their investment in T&E automation. Before I delve into the content, I'm going to able to talk with us today. A little bit about my background. I am a long-time involvement in T&E expense management. The past several years, I have spent developing educational programs to impact the success of the Office of the CFO, and I've spent quite a bit of time over the past few years doing research and speaking on the subject of T&E expense management. So it's been amazing to me the shifts that we've seen due to the changes in the technology and the affordability of technology. And I've actually found T&E area. And as you start to peel back the onion, the business case for T&E automation is often very compelling. So not only are you saving cost on your processing costs, but you're also improving how you spend, and you're also impacting productivity across the enterprise. So it's really an exciting time for us. So a few webinar notes. Today's event is being recorded, and you will be kept in listen-only mode to eliminate any excessive background noise. Links to today's presentation and recording will be sent out to all attendees within 24 hours. We encourage you to ask questions via the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel anytime during the event. I'll do my best to get to your questions during the Q&A panel discussion at the end of the event. If I do not get to your question, we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. Also would like to note that we are going to have a few polling questions during our webinar today. So we sincerely appreciate your consideration in answering all of our polling questions today, as it helps us add color to the webinar, make it more interactive, and in some cases really compares the audience to some survey results that we are going to go over today. In terms of learning objectives, our value proposition to you today, we'd like you to understand risk and efficiencies in T&E reporting that cost companies money, and we'll also talk about specific tactics to mitigate these risks and inefficiencies, and you will be able to identify specific opportunities to mitigate risk and inefficiencies at your company. We'll talk about expense category spending averages, benchmarks, and report processing costs, all of your T&E processing costs. We'll talk about top pain points for improving the process and how to alleviate the pain. Accounting professionals must have expense system features for 2017 to justify in T&E automation. And we'll also talk about how 89% of companies switching to automation achieve ROI in 2 years or less. I have a third objectives that are personal to myself as a speaker. Those are going and then along with that is to take an action. So that's really good for me if I can inspire you to take an action as a result of the webinar. So that action could be download the webinar slides, the webinar recording, reach out to someone at another company who manages T&E expenses, reach out to me on LinkedIn as a connection, or reach out to Nexonia and learn more about how they can help your company more effectively manage T&E expense. So, after the webinar, of course. So I like to also talk about why T&E is important. So why that's important. So the we have on T&E is tremendous. So the amount spent is going down so that's up 3.4% from the previous year. So what we're seeing is that there has definitely been a shift in that T&E spend there. So we're getting some audio issues, so rather than continue on this line, I'm going to go ahead and change, and I'm going to go ahead and re-enter the webinar using my phone. So everyone just be patient, and I'll be right back with you. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. Okay, I'm hoping that I am back now. So hopefully that connection is better. So let's go ahead and continue. So again, I was just making some comments on sometimes we need to go to our CFO and justify that spend and really get folks on board that T&E really deserves our attention. So just the amount of spend that we see, and then there's also the fact of just look at the numbers here, 6 to 12% of the total annual budget is spent on T&E expenses. So that is a tremendous amount of money. So that will get anyone's attention. And the other thing that we'll talk about a little bit later is we'll talk about how T&E is also the most difficult category to control as well. So all of these things kind of put in top of mind. Those of you who might not be the CFO, this is a good way to get that CFO's attention, those folks that control the purse strings, and get them to see that this really deserves your attention. And what you'll see from the webinar is that there's almost always an opportunity to make an impact on the bottom line. So we'll touch on this a lot more later, but sometimes as I've been going through presentations and listening to them at conferences, sometimes we really don't talk about why we invest in T&E spend. So it's important for companies, especially as you're going through your budgets right now, to really look at, okay, we're doing this T&E spend in sales or whatever. What is the reason that we're spending? And then start to look at the ROI to that T&E spend. So you want to make sure that you're spending in the right areas. So it might not be that your overall portfolio mix is to decrease your T&E expenses. It might be that it's to reallocate them into more the areas that offer you more ROI. So just kind of to plant that seed in your mind as we talk about that later, the ROI of that T&E spend. So a little bit about how companies set T&E budgets, how you put some control on your budgets. Most of you are probably partway through your budgets, if not all the way. Just some interesting benchmarks here. A little bit alarming. So 26% do not have expense category limits. 23% are based on company historical spending. That can be a decent way to go. That is assuming that your company is really in line and spending money effectively. If your company is already spending money ineffectively, doing even 10% better is not really going to do you any good. Determined by my annual budgeting process, sometimes I think that means that companies are just rolling up numbers by 5 or 10%. That could be dangerous as well, as I mentioned before. And follow USA GAS per diem rate guidelines. That can be a good practice. I recommend first and foremost that you have those category spending limits. Do some benchmarking on those with some industry standards. There's a lot of research out there. And then also, as you're setting those category limits, tie those
to the ROI that you're receiving. So you want to make sure that you have those benchmarks, you're managing to the benchmarks. You definitely need to have that target in place and understand why it's there. And it's also a good idea to get input from your travelers on why that's there. So just some interesting insights on how companies set those T&E budgets. And then getting into benchmarking, I talk about benchmarking. Benchmarking is important, and it's important to have benchmarks against your industry's relevant spend. It's also important to have benchmarks over time as well. And so you want to have available both of those types of benchmarks. If you look at some research from the Certified Spend Smart report from Q4 2016, we'll see that some top categories here. We have meals at 19%, airfare 15%, and lodging at 14%. And then we have our miscellaneous at 13%. I think part of the reason that's driving this is we're really changing how we travel. So I think we'll start to see categories like Uber and Airbnb. And as we see research going forward, we're gonna see some of those numbers shift. So it's important to look at these benchmarks, and you really need to have that visibility into your spend. So if you don't have that visibility into your T&E spend, you really would do well to make sure that you can get that visibility, and part of that visibility is being able to put these into these key categories of T&E spend. So again, benchmarks are important. We talked about having the benchmarks against industry, but also looking at those benchmarks over time. See how you're doing over time in these categories, and then you'll want to have a good sense of some of the market conditions. So for example, gas went down from 2016 to 2017. Well, was that because gas prices went down, or was that because my traveling changed? So it's a good idea for you to look at kind of the analysis of variance there. But again, it's just important in terms of that benchmarking. So and then you can even dig deeper. So it's fascinating what you can see in terms of the research that we have now. So not only within categories, you can actually look at the most expensive brands. So I actually enjoy reading my Certified Spend Smart reports every month. So in Q1 2017, I had the most expensive brands as Uber and Starbucks, and then we have Delta, American, and Amazon. And Uber being 7% gets back to my point before, where I talked about that miscellaneous category. But these can create interesting incentives in helping you manage your T&E spend. So, for example, you can take a look at within the department, Mike spends $30 on Starbucks and Joe spends $10. So why is that? So start to look at that. Start to look at those incentives. You can actually manage your spend by brands as well. So it's amazing the amount of information that we have out there. So there are different tactics in order for you to help control that T&E spend. So again, I find that research really interesting. It's easy to subscribe to those reports. And then, as I mentioned before, technology is really disrupting how we're traveling. So as I mentioned, if you're looking at your categories, you want to look at things like Uber or Lyft, and then you might want to look at creating a category for Amazon that's really based on how your travelers need to travel to support your business. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to this being such a large amount of spend, it ranks as the second most difficult operating expense category to control. And part of those come in the root causes, which we'll talk about a little later, is just in terms of the policies that companies have, and then there's often a lack of enforcement in those policies. And then, as we mentioned earlier, if you don't have category limits, it's really hard to control that spending. But if we can control that T&E spend, it gives us a framework on how we can better control expenses at our companies across the enterprise and offer that strategic value. So let's go ahead and launch our first polling question. I'm going to go ahead and get that launched for you guys. And it's asking you, as a percent of total spending, what was your company's largest expense category in 2016? I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of the polling questions. So please give us that we can take at the end of the webinar today during our Q&A session. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that polling question up for a while here, and go ahead and leave it up for another 10 seconds or so. And then I'm going to, oh, there we go. All right, I think we're having a little trouble with the poll there. There we go. So I'll leave it up for another few seconds, then we'll go ahead and take a look at the results and see how they compare with our survey results. So let me go ahead and close that, and I'll go ahead and share the results. And you'll see that we have 68% in airfare, 21% in mileage, and 11% in meals. So what we saw in the survey was 19% meals, but what we've been seeing on the webinars is that we are seeing that airfare is really that largest category of expense. So I think part of the reason for that is that companies are realizing, the value of the customer. They're trying to maximize the customer relationships. We're moving to a subscription economy, and then we're also more concerned with the employee experience. We want those face-to-face meetings. So I think we're going to continue to see that. And then in terms of mileage, interesting there, some of the features on the T&E expense solutions that are out there now actually allow you to take control of that mileage. There's actually an app, a Google Map app, so you can actually true up the mileage so you can make sure that you're only paying for the miles that are driven. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, some tremendous amount of savings that we have there. So let's go ahead and transition to the inefficiencies in T&E expense reporting. And so these will give us some of the pain points, maybe some of the pain points that you're experiencing, and some of these pain points will actually help build that business case for T&E expense automation. So pretty alarming to me. 23% to complete one expense report, 15 to 22 minutes to correct expense reports, and then average number of reports and errors with 22%. So we talked about this in the introduction, but we'll talk about this later. It's really important that you build up the cost to process an expense report. So if you don't estimate that number, it's something that you want to invest in estimating what that cost might be. And even if you have that cost, you want to make sure that you're including all of the costs there. But if you just look at the numbers here, you're looking at 45 minutes, 50 minutes to an hour of potentially a salesperson who's on the road. So they're not being productive. You have lost opportunities. If you have errors, then you have people across the enterprise who are just involved in activities that aren't adding value. So again, those are all some of the, just pointing out some of the deficiencies there. And then we talked about this, just an average cost to process one expense report, just an illustration. There's other numbers. The number can depend on your industry and other factors, but a report from PayStream Advisors in 2016, if you have that manual process, the average would be $26.63, and then it's important to look at that compared to the fully automated, which is $6.85. So the important point I like to make here is not necessarily the numbers themselves; it's how much the dollar amount per report that we're saving. So just think about that. If it's $20 per report that you can save, how many expense reports do you process each year? Then you start to look at that, and then the business case for the investment in AP automation becomes pretty compelling. And again, there's benefits above and beyond just improving those costs. But again, we'll talk about this more. It's important that you understand what's going into that cost, and then as you put that cost together, you'll be able to identify opportunities to lower that cost, and you'll begin to see how the right T&E expense management solution can help you really lower those costs. So let's look at some of the research, a little bit more recent research from Certified Annual Expense Management Trends Report. Great research. I've got $10 to $20 for it, 16% under $7 per report, 31%. I think that's fantastic. I think that number may just be a stitch high. Here's the part that concerns me a little bit. 44% do not track report processing costs. So again, this is often an area where companies can get tremendous value from T&E expense automation, reducing those processing costs. If you just see what those numbers can be. So I think that's an important exercise. So if that's something you don't do, I recommend that that's something you invest in doing. And we'd like to see all of our companies tracking those reporting costs, but also benchmarking those and having a continuous improvement mindset to keep those costs down. And then just to go through what's some of the components across the enterprise of a manual expense reporting process, if you experience any of these areas. And I think these slides are compelling because they show how many different departments the T&E expense report processing touches. So if you have a manual process and you're an employee, you're on the road, you may have to gather receipts, write down receipts, enter them into Excel, you might have to print spreadsheet tables, staple, make copies, sign, report, mail the manager, wait. So all of these are adding to the cost of that expense report, the employee's time. But again, especially if it's a salesperson, it's also contributing to lost opportunity and lost productivity. And then, of course, on the right side we have, and then wait. What used to happen to me was when my sales guys would come in for their meetings, they would come to my office and say, why does it take so long for me to get my expense report back? So one of the consequences of ineffective T&E expense report processing is we have unhappy sales people. So we definitely don't want that. So that was always my objective, to make those folks happy. And then your managers. It also takes the time of your managers. If it's a manual process, sometimes companies, the managers receive reports for all employees, and they can receive them at any time during the month. They have to check expenses for receipts, review out-of-policy returns. So this is important to know. You're expecting your managers to be very versed in your policies and immediately identify those violations and know those by heart. You're assuming that they have a very high travel IQ. When I was back in the corporate world, I think the only time I saw my T&E expense policy, and until we started really looking at that again, was when I walked in the door for my orientation. And so we need to make sure that we optimize the travel IQ of our managers and travelers. That will definitely help. And then if we have errors, the manager has to go back and forth with the employee, again, taking up time, and then sign approved reports, and that can get caught up if you don't have a mobile application, so those expense reports can get caught up. Again, you have frustration, lost time opportunity, employees, managers, and then, of course, our friends, the accountants, then this can be an area where the most inefficiency can occur without automation and especially in workflow. They can receive reports from all employees at different times of the month. They may have to check receipts, check the manager's approvals are right, match the receipts with the line items, verify the charges, might have to make sure the GL codes line up, manually enter data into the accounting software, and then they could potentially have to manually enter data from accounting software to payroll for reimbursement. So each of these areas of manual intervention, one, it can cause errors, and two, it's just time consuming in and of itself, and it also can cause unnecessary communication across the enterprise. So again, just as you're looking at that expense reporting process, that expense reporting cost, if you haven't done this, again, it's really compelling to go into the weeds and see all the people, technology, and processes that are involved. And again, it's pretty enlightening because you'll immediately see that there are usually many areas of improvement. Some of those hidden costs that you need to consider. Hours to create, review, and approve reports. If you're using paper, printing, storage, this is one that I don't think gets caught all the time. Required for reconciliation and the time to reimburse. And then the one on the bottom is really the one that strikes me most as a finance professional. Lost productivity in that lost opportunity. So you want to be able to quantify what those numbers are, as they are cost ineffective T&E expense reporting and management, and that'll be part of your business case. So I think this is an interesting slide that folks can use to quantify some of the cost and lost opportunities. If you're looking at an individual employee, just look at their hourly wage, time spent on the report, give you a sense of that overhead cost per report for that employee. And then this is where I like to see sales rep, that lost opportunity, time available selling versus the time spent per report. So we want to minimize that time spent per report, and we can start putting a dollar amount on that. And your sales people will become your friends if you minimize the time that they have to spend, and if they get paid more quickly. So I often get the question on the webinars, how am I going to get all of my employees to buy into this new process if it's different from what they're used to doing? And my answer is tell them they'll get paid more quickly, and they won't spend as much time putting their reports together. And they usually will have a smile on their face, and that is an easy conversation to have. The other thing that you need to consider in terms of T&E is that T&E fraud is all too common. You need to have controls in place, review in place to catch that. Approximately 15% of all fraudulent disbursements involve expense reimbursement. This is a whole different webinar, but just the sources: mischaracterized expenses, overstatement of actual expense, fictitious expenses, and multiple reimbursements. A lot of these sources of fraud can be mitigated through the T&E expense management solutions. You can actually program in a sense, your controls of your policy, and so that's another pillar of that value proposition, is to mitigate that T&E fraud. And if you think about it, any expense that's out of policy is really T&E expense fraud. So that can absolutely be unintentional on your employee's part. So again, a big part of mitigating T&E fraud is that education of your employees and all of your travelers. And a best practice would be to review your T&E policies with your travelers on a yearly basis, and also during that, make that be a discussion on the category limits, why they are what they are, the changes that they might need, and then they will also take some ownership in terms of that policy and that compliance as well. So some of the pain points for the T&E program administrators, this might be those of you who aren't the T&E program administrator, maybe you're the CFO or the treasurer or treasury manager. These are good conversation starters. If you haven't implemented a T&E expense management solution at your company, go over there and get a sense of these pain points. They can be the building blocks of that business case. Losing paper receipts, submitting without receipts. Again, that gets to our manual processes. A lot of the applications now, which we will discuss further, allow travelers to actually scan in those receipts. Failure to submit reports on time. Again, a part of that is just how long it takes them to do that. The fact that they can't create reports on the road, which is a key functionality of these T&E solutions. Time it takes to reconcile, review, and approve reports. We discussed that. Manual review of policy violations, and then we talked about this, errors on expense reports. So what you can see as you look down this list is that it's kind of glaring that technology implemented the right way is really the answer to a lot of these T&E expense pain points that many companies suffer. And then in terms of, the number one reason companies switch to T&E automation, what drives them there is that simplifying the expense reporting process. Really simplifying the process is really gonna help you mitigate the cost of that process and alleviate the things that cause unproductive behavior. And so let's talk about how companies are managing T&E expenses at this point, and take a look at the technology solutions there, and then we'll do some benchmarking on that across company size, and then we'll talk about the must-have features that you should look for if you're going to invest in a cloud web-based application. So we'll see that there has has been. 2014 was the high point for cloud and web-based. Then we had a little bit of a dip. We still see a prevalence almost of Excel spreadsheets, which in and of themselves have a lot of problems, errors, abound, just no single version of the truth. Then ERP systems. ERPs just simply were not built for expense report processing. So a lot of times there's a lot of custom programming that goes on. The same point I'll make on a homegrown solution. There is a lot of maintenance and programming that is involved there. So just to look at where we are. And then let's take a look at systems by company size. So we start to look at, from the left we have the small business and mid-size and then enterprise. And not surprising, maybe what you'll see is that smaller companies are more heavily reliant on Excel. And then as we move towards enterprise, we have more web-based solutions that companies are implementing. What I would like to see is that obviously we'd like to see that the small businesses really take advantage of the web-based solutions. I think we'll start to see that. I think part of it is educational. So I think companies really understanding how easy it is to make the business case, understanding the cost of adopting the solution, the ease of adopting the solution and the relative cost, and being able to quantify the benefits. And then I think there's still some resistance to change in some of the smaller companies and the mid-sized companies in terms of changing process. But when you start to educate everyone involved how much easier their life's going to be and effectively educate them in terms of the benefits to the business, then that's really where the win comes in at. So I think part of the issue also on that side is making that effective business case, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You have to be able to make it, and you have to be able to make the in written form, but you also have to be able to communicate and win that approval. And so just interesting there to see that 80% of enterprise folks have automated systems, and 36% of our small businesses have those automated systems. So we're going to go ahead and launch our second polling question, is asking you how your organization currently manages T&E expense reporting. So again, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering the polling question. It'll be interesting to see how the demographics of the audience compare with the demographics of the survey results that we just looked at, and then I'll be able to see where we're at in terms of technology adoption and really start to tailor my comments more based on the demographics of where everyone's at in terms of the technological maturity in terms of T&E expense reporting. So I'll go ahead and give everyone another 5 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and share the results. Okay. Let's go ahead and share the results. Much bigger percentage than I would have thought. I already have web-based expense software, which is good. My note to those of you that have that web-based expense software, it's important that you make sure that you are leveraging all the functionality available and getting the most ROI possible out of your investment. So sometimes what we'll see even in survey results is that it is obvious that the users and the companies aren't really leveraging all the tools that are available to them. So as we go through the must-have features, you should on your mind be thinking, does my solution that I have offer this? If not, why not? And then start to think, how can I make sure my users and my company are leveraging all these great benefits? And then those of you that are in the 35% paper-based spreadsheets, I hope we are inspiring you to take a look at what's out there in terms of T&E expense automation solution. I think what you'll find is that, again, the business case is very compelling, and it is certainly worth a look to see what that business case looks like specifically for your company. So again, let's get back to calculating the ROI of T&E expense spending, just because I think this is something in terms of more effective T&E expense management. So from a comprehensive study across 14 industries by Oxford Economics and U.S. Travel Association, a study for every dollar invested in business travel, it generated $9.50 in revenue and $2.90 in profit. My first reaction is, wow, that's that's pretty amazing to me. However, if you think about it, the way I think about it is that imagine what those numbers could be. If we had more effective T&E expense processing, if we were mitigating those costs, we were also directing our spend in a more efficient manner. So let's take a look at, again, so this is some research. Again, this is something that I would suggest that you do in your budgeting. If you haven't done it, go back and do this. Look at the reasons for business travel, and if you just look at some research from Carlson, Wagonlit Travel, you can just see some of the different reasons that you have for spend. And then what you'll want to do is identify, okay, what are our reasons for business travel? And then okay, how do I define the ROI related to those? And then how do I allocate my spend more efficiently based on the ROI that I'm seeing? And what I think we would see as we see a little more recent research, we'll see a lot more in the supplier meeting areas. We'll see a lot more in the client and prospect meeting, and we'll also see more in those team related meetings. So again, it's a good exercise to understand, and then reported outcomes and benefits, just areas where that ROI was seen. Business development, not surprising. I think as we get more recent research, we'll see client service delivery as a much higher percentage. We'll see folks deepening the customer relationship, building more business. I like to see increased collaboration, strategic alignment, innovation. So you can just see the components of building up the ROI to the T&E itself. So we have kind of two ROI components here, right? The ROI of the money that we spend for the purpose, but also the ROI to investing in that T&E automation in order to mitigate our invoice processing costs, impact productivity across the enterprise, but also you can also improve your working capital as well. So, and then some more information, executive, just some information again, mean to the bottom line. So it gives folks some ROI, return on investment, meeting of responses. So it's not surprisingly customer meetings seem to get that ROI of $1. But again, just some ways to benchmark, giving you the framework in order to start to look at that ROI per the type of T&E expense that you have at your company. So again, I think this is really interesting, and I'm happy to really dig into the ROI of the T&E spend itself, because I think that's what you're going to start to see more content on in this area over the especially next year. So let's talk about the ROI of more effective T&E expense reporting, and then take a step back a little bit, kind of some review the top T&E pressures to improve from our survey results. Reduce expense processing costs, we talked about that. Lack of control over T&E spending, and that lack of control could be for many reasons. It can be you don't have a policy in place, you don't enforce it, you don't have the tools to enforce it, poor visibility into expense data, non-compliant expenses, and lengthy reimbursement times. All of these are interrelated in some way. So I talked about those, and all those together form that business case. So let's look at the must-have expense features. If you have made that investment or are looking to make that investment. So those of you who already have made the investment, make sure that these features are, that you have these features, and if you are, your folks are leveraging them. And so automation, you want to look for expense report creation on the road, workflow process and approvals, and also look to integrability, direct credit card feeds. That could be tremendously beneficial on the accounting side. You want to look for mobile application, smartphone enabled, receipt capture, mobile report creation, approval, and applications that will accommodate policy tools. I was actually out at a business dinner with a client of mine, and they were showing me how the mobile application worked. When the person was done with ready to submit the report, they hit the have hard and soft stops on your policy as well. It can help ensure compliance. It'll automatically recognize duplicate expenses, can enforce category spending limits, and then if you have soft limits, it can automatically notify managers of violations or even the person trying to submit. We talked about integrability. You want to make sure that data can be passed back and forth between your accounting software, your GL, your HR system, CRM, ERP, and some of your other systems that facilitate direct deposit. So that integrability is important as well, because that integrability is really what saves us a lot of time, especially in terms of the reconciliation and the accounting that's done on the back end as well. And then kind of the backbone really to effective T&E expense management. And I always say you can't manage what you can't see. So we want that visibility into the spending, into the process. Maybe we can see where things are getting caught in our workflow. Spending by category, department, employee, by brand, right? So we can have Starbucks as well. So these are all, I'd say, the must-have features, and they can, relative importance of them can depend on your company. But another point to make here is that having all this functionality is extremely important all the time, but just as your company grows and makes acquisitions, your business becomes more complicated, the ROI to these features just grows. And then talking about how automation delivers ROI, just some proof behind the point from the T&E Management Survey 2017, 89% of companies receive ROI in 2 years or less, and 70% of companies receive ROI in 1 year or less. I personally believe that those numbers are possibly, especially 1 year or less, should be higher. I think some of that being a little bit lower than I would expect would just be that the companies are not really leveraging the functionality of the solutions to their greatest possibility, but still very impressive numbers. And then those of you who are small business, again, we have a little bit more apprehension sometimes. Look, the small businesses actually had 83%, so they were the quickest to realize that investment. So just hopefully some inspiration for the small businesses to take a look at what's out there. Top features for the sources of the ROI, again, the components of that value proposition, efficiency, expense reporting, costs, which can include processing costs, travel booking control. So some of the features of the solutions out there now have integrated travel solutions, which can really help. So we don't have everyone out there on Hotwire or something else. You can actually put in controls where you can make sure that the person gets the lowest logical fare. Level accessibility, being able to do things on the road, elimination of duplicate payments, reduction in staff, more mileage. Again, we talked about the ability of some solutions to accurately track the mileage, reduction in fraudulent expenses, and then that productivity as well. So ROI generated building your business case. If we develop a business case and invest in T&E automation, these are the components of that, and these are the dollar amounts that we're going to see. Just some examples for a company, some of the results. Reduce mileage expenses by $360,000 in a 6-month period. That's right at the bottom line. Increase compliance, $200,000 in annual savings. If your postage costs $2,000, this is my favorite, 250 hours in accounting time per year. So important to me. Sometimes I think there's too much of a focus on talking about how to reduce headcount. To me, it's about having that person and having them focus on more productive activities. So I think just thinking about having another accounting person, how much more you could do in your accounting department to deliver strategic value from that function. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our final polling question, asking you to share with us what your organization's top area for T&E improvement is for the year ahead. So again, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. I can take your questions in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. Still, for our Q&A session, which we'll have begin right after we take a look at the results from our last polling question. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another 5 seconds or so, and then we're going to go ahead and take a look at those results. I'll make a few comments, then we'll have time for a few questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up with some closing thoughts and some advice and key success factors for effective T&E expense management. So let me go ahead and close the poll. Go ahead and share those results. So we have 35% reduced processing and workflow inefficiencies. About what I would expected. Again, automation can certainly be a key in that, and I want to add a comment in that sometimes companies fail to look at the workflow of exception items. So sometimes we have to look at those exceptions. So sometimes the exception item is going to this strange workflow process that doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And then two of these kind of go together: tighter control for employee T&E spend and increasing travel policy compliance. I think those really go together, and it's a function of having that policy in place, having people understand the policy, that travel IQ, and that's that compliance, that IQ, and that control can really be a function of people understanding the policy, right? I think that's the control. They understand what they're not supposed to do, but you can also automate some of those spending limits as well. And so I guess I'm a little surprised to see lower expense report processing costs on there, but some of you may feel that you've already conquered that. But for those of you who have not invested in this solution yet, I think that would be an area which could be a key component of that ROI. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for answering all the polling questions. I appreciate your insights into the polling questions. So first question. Someone is asking about how to avoid issues in the training and the rollout. So the T&E expense solution providers are very good at providing you, helping you in educating and holding training sessions. So you can actually hold those training sessions virtually. So a lot of times, if folks are in for a meeting, you can do something like a GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar as well. So there's a lot of support that you're getting on that side from your providers. And then the other side of it is that some of the companies and CFOs I've talked to, they've actually rolled out the new solution to beta groups. So they find the folks that are most technically savvy, and they roll the new solution out to those individuals. And then what they find is once those individuals have access to it, word spreads. And then what happens is that there becomes a buzz, and the people that are not on the new system yet are really going to be the ones who are begging, who are kind of begging for that. So thank you for that question. Next question is around kind of some common issues that I see with folks in making an effective business case. So in my mind, it has to be. I think some people don't put it into a formal process. So I look at it as more of maybe an investor review. So I put together my business case, and then I have a review in front of all my stakeholders who are impacted by the changes going to an automated solution, but also those who hold the purse strings as well, maybe the treasurer or the CFO. And part of that is there are two constituencies that we need to get on board here. We need to get the people that control the purse strings on board, but we also need to get the people that are involved, that their lives are going to change when we change these processes as well. And to go a little further on that point, there's always going to be someone in the crowd who is a Mr. or Mrs. No. So my advice is to engage those people up front. So really sit down with them, understand their challenges, communicate to them directly what the benefits are going to be to them. And what I've seen happen before is I've seen a CFO walk into a meeting, listen for a bit, and then say, the person that's Mr. No, John, what do you think? And then John can immediately torpedo the project. But I've seen this too, where the CFO tries to call on the Mr. No, John, and John's already on board. And John says, "Man, I really love this. This is really going to help my area." And then you can see the look on the CFO's face, and that can be a tremendous value. And also, just taking the time to really have that effective executive summary. You want to lay out the issues that you're facing, the cost of not addressing the issues, and then disarm any objections that people will have up front. You know what the objections are going to be, disarm those up front. You want to have that clear cost-benefit analysis. You want to have multiple solutions so you don't have that vendor bias, and you want to establish the accountability within that business case, and you also want to provide the metrics of success and communicate those metrics of success and do so on an ongoing matter. And then another piece of it is just the communication of the business case. You can talk about it, get it going around the water cooler. You want to present with passion, and so that passion that goes a long way, that passion and that energy. So that is a really good way to get that business case. In terms of some of the functionality questions around global companies, they absolutely have that capability across the world, multiple currencies. There's a lot of advancements being done on syncing up and actually facilitating payments. And so the landscape of the features is absolutely changing. Someone's asking, what are some of the new things that are coming out in terms of features? I mentioned the integrated travel. I think we're going to see much more on that front in terms of the integrated travel piece, and that can be tremendously valuable. And then someone else is asking for just some differentiators in terms of if you're looking at different providers. There are some research studies out there, like G2 Crowd Report, so you can look at those independent research areas. Again, you want to look at the features that you really need, and then you want to look at that customer service. I think customer service is where I see a big difference in terms of some of the providers out there. And the other area where I see differences is just in terms of the thought leadership and the research that companies are doing as well. That's often a good indication. And then also related to customer service is how engaged they are with their customer base. So how are they managing their development of their software? Is it interactive? Do they do all of that in-house? So how is that done? So I think all of those things are all tremendously important in terms of making that selection. So I'm going to go ahead and I'd like to wrap things up with to kind of put things to a fine point. I always encourage folks to print out a few slides. So these last few slides to me would be tremendously important if I had my practitioner hat on. So you can really set the foundation for effective T&E expense management. Your company's T&E policy, that's really the foundation. If you don't have them, create them. I mentioned improve the travel IQ of your employees, and you have to take active measures to enforce the policies. You want to arm travelers with better technology to simplify the expense reporting process, automate key components of the expense management process, benchmark company T&E spending regularly. Again, get those benchmarks, industry, and do those year over year. And then you really want to leverage analytics to improve intelligence and data. So you really want to have that reporting functionality there as well. And in terms of the pillars of effective T&E expense management, things to keep top of mind, keep it simple. You need that visibility across the enterprise, digging deep. You need benchmarking. You need to establish that control. And you need to have a focus on that processing cost mitigation. Again, if you have not done this before, really get an estimate of how much it costs to process that report. And then in terms of the dimensions of the T&E expense automation, value that business case, reduce wasteful and fraudulent spend mitigation, processing cost mitigation, improved employee productivity, improved working capital management, and also improved allocation into our T&E expense portfolio as well, so where we have that spend as well. So finally, I would like to thank you, the audience, so much for your valuable time. Happy holidays to you all, and make the rest of your day great. Thank you very much.